The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Nora Harrington's face as she watched her last hope disappear with the dust cloud kicked up by the departing stagecoach. Standing alone at the edge of Aztec, New Mexico territory, in the summer of 1885, she realized how foolish she had been to believe her cousin's promises of a better life out west. Nora clutched her small valise tighter, her knuckles white with tension. 23 years old and completely alone, she had sold everything she owned back in Boston to make this journey, only to find that the cousin who had promised her lodging and employment had moved on months ago, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note with the local postmaster. Headed to California. Better prospects. No forwarding address, no apology. Excuse me, madam, you look a mite lost. The voice behind her was gentle but startling. Nora turned to face a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a weathered face. I'm Martha Wilson. I run the boarding house just down the street. Nora Harrington, she replied, trying to maintain her composure despite the growing panic in her chest. I'm afraid I've found myself in a difficult situation. Within an hour, Martha had arranged a small room for Nora and promised to help her find work. Times are hard everywhere, dear, but we take care of our own in Aztec. Tomorrow we'll see about finding you something suitable. The next morning, Nora sat at Martha's kitchen table while the older woman made introductions to Aztec's most prominent citizens who had stopped by for coffee. Among them was Theodore Grant, the town banker, who eyed Nora with an interest that made her skin crawl. I might have a position for a young lady of your quality, he said, his eyes lingering too long on her face. My current secretary is leaving to get married next week. Before Nora could respond, Martha intervened. Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile mentioned needing help as well. His wife's been ill and they've been short-handed. 3 days later, Nora had secured work at Peterson's Mercantile. The hours were long, the pay meager, but it was honest work, and Mr. Peterson and his sickly wife treated her with respect. In the evenings, she helped Martha with the cooking and cleaning at the boarding house to offset her room and board. Weeks passed, and Nora began to establish a routine. She learned the names and faces of the townsfolk, discovered which customers preferred to chat and which wanted swift service, and even began to enjoy the simplicity of life in this dusty frontier town, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. One sweltering afternoon in late August, Nora was dispatched to deliver a package to the Dawson Ranch, 5 miles outside of town. Mr. Peterson had arranged for the sheriff's deputy to escort her, but when the young man failed to appear, Nora decided to make the journey alone rather than disappoint the customer. Take the mare, Mr. Peterson instructed, concerned. She's gentle, but be back before sundown. The trail is clear enough, but it's not wise for a young woman to be out alone after dark. The ride was pleasant at first. The rolling landscape stretched out before her, dotted with sage and juniper, the distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop to the otherwise harsh terrain. Nora allowed herself to enjoy the rare moment of solitude and freedom. 2 hours later, package delivered and heading back to town, Nora decided to take what appeared to be a shortcut through a stand of cottonwoods along the San Juan River. The mare seemed hesitant, pulling against the reins, but Nora urged her forward, eager to return before Mr. Peterson grew worried. She didn't notice the ground changing beneath the horse's hooves until it was too late. The mare whinnied in distress, sinking suddenly to her fetlocks in what had appeared to be solid ground. Nora yanked back on the reins, confusion turning to horror as she felt her own feet being sucked downward. Quicksand. The word flashed in her mind, remembered from adventure books she'd read as a child. She managed to slide from the saddle as the panicked mare lunged forward, breaking free and scrambling back to solid ground. Nora wasn't so fortunate. Each movement only seemed to drag her deeper into the treacherous mire. Within minutes, the thick, muddy sand had trapped her up to her knees. By the time her initial panic subsided enough for rational thought, she was waist-deep and sinking slowly but inexorably. "Help!" she called out, her voice sounding small against the vastness of the landscape. "Somebody please help me!" The mare had retreated to safer ground but remained nearby, as if understanding her rider's peril. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Nora heard the pounding of approaching hoofbeats. Her voice was hoarse from shouting, her arms exhausted from trying to distribute her weight to slow her descent. "Hello, is someone there?" A man's voice called out, deep and clear. "Here." "I'm here by the river," Nora cried, renewed hope giving strength to her voice. A moment later, a rider appeared at the edge of the cottonwoods. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. With expert ease, he dismounted and approached cautiously, assessing the situation. "Don't move, madam," he instructed, his voice calm. "Moving will only make you sink faster." "I wasn't planning on dancing," Nora retorted, her fear making her sharp-tongued. A surprised chuckle escaped him as he removed his hat, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 29. His hair was the color of dark honey, his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Ethan Alden," he introduced himself, already unwinding the lasso from his saddle. "I'd offer to shake hands, but you seem a bit indisposed at the moment." Despite her predicament, Nora felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Nora Harrington, I'd be most obliged if you could help me out of this mess." Ethan worked quickly, expertly forming a loop in his lasso. "I'm going to throw this to you. Try to get it around your chest, under your arms. Don't try to pull yourself out, I'll do the pulling. Slow and steady wins this race." His first throw landed perfectly. Nora secured the loop around her torso, tucking it firmly under her arms. "Ready?" Ethan asked, wrapping the rope around his gloved hands and bracing himself against a sturdy tree trunk. "As I'll ever be," Nora replied, gripping the rope with white-knuckled determination. Ethan began to pull, the muscles in his arms and shoulders straining against his shirt. The quicksand seemed reluctant to release its prey, yielding only inch by grudging inch. Sweat beaded on Ethan's brow as he maintained steady pressure, never jerking or tugging too forcefully. "You're doing fine," he encouraged, his voice tight with exertion. "Almost got your legs free." After what seemed like an eternity, Nora felt her legs break free from the suffocating grip of the quicksand. With one final heave, Ethan pulled her onto solid ground where she collapsed in an undignified heap, gasping with relief. "Thank you," she managed between breaths. I was certain." "No need to think about that now," Ethan said, crouching beside her and offering his canteen. "You're safe. That's what matters." As Nora drank gratefully, she took the opportunity to study her rescuer more closely. Beneath the layer of trail dust, Ethan Alden was undeniably handsome, with strong, clean features and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested a man who found joy in life. "What brings you out this way alone, Miss Harrington?" he asked, reclaiming his canteen. "It's not exactly safe country for solitary rides." "I was delivering a package to the Dawson Ranch," Nora explained, attempting to brush some of the drying mud from her skirts. "I'm working at Peterson's Mercantile in town." "Ah, you must be the new girl everyone's talking about, the Boston lady." Ethan smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "News travels fast in these parts." "Evidently," Nora replied, suddenly self-conscious about her bedraggled appearance. "And you, Mr. Alden, are you local to Aztec, born and raised just outside town?" My family runs the Double A Ranch about 10 miles north of here." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Which I should be getting back to. My father will be wondering what's kept me." Nora accepted his assistance, wincing as she put weight on her right ankle. "I seem to have twisted something in all the excitement." Concern furrowed Ethan's brow. "You won't be riding back to town on that ankle. I'll take you up with me. We can retrieve your horse and send word to town that you're safe." Before Nora could protest, Ethan had lifted her onto his horse, a magnificent bay stallion that stood at least 16 hands high. He swung up behind her with practiced ease, his chest warm and solid against her back. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. His arms formed a protective circle around her, and despite her usual insistence on propriety, Nora found herself grateful for the support. As they rode toward the Double A, Ethan kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of growing up in the territory. His voice, a pleasant baritone with just a hint of Western drawl, had a soothing effect on Nora's frayed nerves. "That's home," Ethan said as they crested a rise, revealing a sprawling ranch house nestled in a valley, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Even from a distance, Nora could see it was a prosperous operation, with cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands and several hands visible working around the property. A tall, silver-haired man emerged from the barn as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile of welcome that quickly shifted to concern when he noticed Nora. "Found a damsel in distress, Pa," Ethan called out as they rode into the yard. "Miss Nora Harrington from town. Got herself caught in quicksand down by the river bend." "Good Lord!" Ethan's father exclaimed, hurrying forward to help Nora dismount. "Are you hurt, miss?" "Just a twisted ankle and wounded pride," Nora assured him, leaning gratefully on his offered arm. "Your son saved my life, Mr. Alden." "James Alden, miss. Welcome to the Double A," he nodded toward the house. "Let's get you inside and have my wife take a look at that ankle. Ethan, go fetch your mother." The Alden home was comfortably appointed, with solid furniture and touches of refinement that spoke of prosperity tempered by practical frontier sensibilities. James settled Nora on a sofa in the front parlor just as a handsome woman in her 50s hurried in, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Eleanor Alden," she introduced herself, already examining Nora's ankle with gentle, competent hands. "Ethan told me what happened. You poor dear, what a frightening ordeal." "I'm eternally grateful to your son," Nora said, wincing slightly as Eleanor probed the swollen joint. "If he hadn't come along when he did." "Providence, that's what it was," Eleanor declared, rising to fetch bandages from a nearby cabinet. "Ethan wasn't even supposed to be riding that way today. He was headed to the south pasture when he decided to check the river crossing first." While Eleanor wrapped Nora's ankle with practiced efficiency, James sent one of the ranch hands to town with news of Nora's whereabouts and to retrieve her mare. "You'll stay for supper, of course," Eleanor insisted, "and likely the night. That ankle needs rest before you attempt the ride back to town." "I couldn't impose," Nora protested weakly, though the thought of climbing back on a horse anytime soon made her shudder. "Nonsense," James said firmly. "We've plenty of room, and our daughter Rebecca would never forgive us if we sent you away. She's been away teaching school in Santa Fe but returns tomorrow, always complaining there aren't enough young ladies in these parts for friendship." Over a hearty meal of beef stew, freshly baked bread, and apple pie, Nora found herself sharing the story of her journey from Boston and her disappointment upon arrival. The Aldens listened with sympathy, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested silent communication born of decades together. "Your cousin showed poor character, leaving you stranded like that," Alina said, refilling Nora's coffee cup. "But perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Aztec is growing, and we need good people with education and refinement." "Mother believes everything happens for a reason," Ethan explained, his eyes meeting Nora's across the table. Something in his gaze made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with her earlier brush with death. After dinner, Ethan showed Nora to the family's small library while his parents tended to evening chores. "Not many books compared to what you're probably used to in Boston," he apologized, "but reading material is precious out here." "It's wonderful," Nora said sincerely, running her fingers along the spines of well-loved volumes ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry to dog-eared copies of Shakespeare and Dickens. "My father was a professor at Harvard. Our home was filled with books." "Was?" Ethan asked gently, noting her use of past tense. "He passed away last winter, pneumonia." Nora swallowed hard, the grief still raw. "My mother died when I was young. When father was gone, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. My cousin's invitation seemed like a sign." Ethan's hand covered hers briefly in a gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry for your loss, and sorry your cousin proved unreliable, but I'm not sorry you ended up in Aztec." The warmth in his voice caused Nora to look up, meeting his steady gaze. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of mutual interest that both thrilled and frightened her. The moment was broken by Alina's return, carrying a nightdress and robe. "These should fit well enough for tonight," she said, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere between the young people. "Ethan, your father needs help with the new colt." That night, lying in the comfortable guest bedroom, Nora found her thoughts continually returning to Ethan Alden. His quiet competence, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, all had made an impression far deeper than mere gratitude warranted. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "The man saved your life. Of course you feel drawn to him." Yet even as she drifted off to sleep, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had begun that day, something that had little to do with quicksand and lassos, and everything to do with the connection she'd felt to the blue-eyed cowboy who'd pulled her to safety. Morning brought the arrival of Rebecca Alden, a vivacious young woman of 20 with her father's silver-blue eyes and her mother's warm smile. She took to Nora immediately, delighted to have another educated woman to converse with. "You simply must stay a few days," Rebecca insisted as they shared breakfast. "My ankle is much improved," Nora demurred, though the thought of returning to her small room at the boarding house held less appeal than it had the day before. "At least stay through Sunday," Alina suggested. "We're having neighbors over after church. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the community." With gentle persistence, the Aldens convinced Nora to extend her stay. Throughout the day, she found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life. Alina taught her to make sourdough biscuits in the spacious kitchen, while Rebecca showed her the garden where vegetables and herbs thrived despite the harsh climate. In the afternoon, Ethan invited Nora to join him for a short ride to see the property, assuring her they would avoid any boggy areas. "I promise to keep you on solid ground this time," he said with a teasing smile that made her cheeks warm. Seated comfortably on a gentle mare from the Alden stables, Nora followed Ethan along well-worn trails that wound through the ranch. He was a natural teacher, explaining the operation of the cattle business and pointing out the features that made the double a successful. The reliable water source, the sheltered valleys that provided protection during winter storms, the careful breeding program his grandfather had begun decades earlier. "Your family has built something remarkable here," Nora observed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking the ranch house and surrounding pastures. "You must be very proud." "I am," Ethan agreed, his expression thoughtful, "though I sometimes wonder if I'm contributing enough. My older brother Daniel was meant to take over eventually. He had a natural head for the business side of ranching. After he was killed in the war, that responsibility fell to me." "I'm sorry about your brother," Nora said softly. "Was he with the Union forces?" Ethan nodded. "Died at Gettysburg. I was 16, too young to enlist. By the time I was old enough, the war was nearly over." He gazed out over the land, his expression distant. "Daniel wrote me letters about the books he read, the places he saw back east, made me curious about the wider world." "Yet you stayed here," Nora observed. "This is home," Ethan said simply. "But I've tried to bring some of that wider world back with me. Went to college in Denver for 2 years. Read everything I could get my hands on." He smiled at her surprised expression. "What did you think cowboys can't appreciate literature?" "I'm learning that my preconceptions about the West were woefully inadequate," Nora admitted, returning his smile. As they rode back toward the ranch house, Ethan grew uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, as they approached the stables, he said, "I hope you'll consider staying in Aztec, Miss Harrington. The territory needs people like you." Before Nora could respond, Rebecca appeared, waving excitedly. "Letter for you, Nora. The hand who went to town brought back your things and this letter from Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house." The letter contained both welcome and unwelcome news. Mr. Peterson was understanding about Nora's absence and had arranged for someone else to cover her duties for a few days. However, Mrs. Wilson regretfully informed her that upon her return, she would need to share her room with another young woman who had arrived unexpectedly, a niece of the mayor's who needed accommodation while teaching at the new school. "Not ideal," Nora sighed, folding the letter. "But Mrs. Wilson has been very kind, and I can hardly complain when I'm the newcomer." "Actually," Rebecca said, her eyes sparkling with sudden inspiration, "this might be perfect timing. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, is retiring next month to live with her daughter in Colorado. Mother's been fretting about finding someone suitable to replace her." Ethan, who had been unsaddling the horses nearby, looked up sharply. "Becca, Miss Harrington might not want to be a housekeeper." "She's educated, probably used to—" "Oh, I didn't mean as a housekeeper exactly," Rebecca clarified hastily. "More of a household manager, someone to help Mother with correspondence, manage the domestic staff, perhaps assist with the accounts. Mother's eyesight isn't what it was, and with the ranch expanding." "It's not a bad idea," Alina said thoughtfully, having joined them in time to hear Rebecca's suggestion. "We've been discussing hiring someone with more education than the usual domestic help. The position would include private quarters in the East Wing, of course, and a very fair salary." Nora's mind raced. The offer was tempting, far better accommodations than the boarding house, interesting work, and the company of a family she already found herself drawn to. Yet something held her back. "It's very kind of you to offer," she began carefully, "but I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of yesterday's incident." "This has nothing to do with the Quicksand," Alina assured her. "We've been discussing this position for months. You're simply the first qualified person we've met who might be interested." "I'd need to give proper notice to Mr. Peterson," Nora said, her resolve weakening. "And to Mrs. Wilson." "Of course," James agreed, joining the conversation. "Take the weekend to consider it. No need to decide immediately." But by Sunday evening, after a day spent at the small Aztec church, and an afternoon entertaining neighbors and ranch hands for a leisurely outdoor meal, Nora had made up her mind. The double felt right in a way no place had since her father's death. The position offered independence, respect, and the chance to be part of something meaningful. "I accept your offer," she told the Aldens after the last guest had departed, "if you're still certain it's what you want." "Excellent," James exclaimed, looking genuinely pleased. "We'll ride into town tomorrow to make the arrangements with Peterson and collect your things." Only Ethan's reaction was ambiguous, a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes before he excused himself to check on a mare about to foal. Nora found herself wondering if he disapproved of her appointment, or if perhaps her presence made him uncomfortable for some reason she couldn't fathom. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Nora settled into her new role at the AA. Her duties were varied and engaging, managing the household accounts, overseeing the two young women who helped with cooking and cleaning, organizing supplies for the ranch hands, and assisting Alina with her extensive correspondence. To Nora's surprise, she found herself thriving in the position. Her organizational skills, honed through years of helping her father with his academic papers, proved invaluable in bringing order to the ranch's domestic operations. Alina was effusive in her praise, and James often remarked that he didn't know how they had managed before her arrival. Only with Ethan did Nora feel a lingering awkwardness. He was unfailingly polite, even friendly, but maintained a certain distance that puzzled and, if she were honest, hurt her. The easy camaraderie they had shared during her first days at the ranch seemed to have vanished, replaced by careful courtesy. One crisp October morning, Nora was inventorying supplies in the root cellar when she heard the cellar door open above her. "I'll be finished soon," she called, assuming it was one of the kitchen girls needing something. "No rush," Ethan's voice replied, startling her enough that she nearly dropped the ledger she was holding. "I just came to get some apples for the horses, bribery to make the medicine go down easier." "There are plenty in the barrel by the south wall," Nora directed, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were in the confined space, illuminated only by the lantern she had brought down. Ethan moved to the apple barrel, filling a small sack with the fruit. As he worked, he seemed to be wrestling with something, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Have I offended you in some way, Mr. Alden?" Nora finally asked, unable to bear the tension any longer. Ethan looked up sharply. "What? No, of course not." "Then why have you been avoiding me these past weeks?" The directness of her question surprised even Nora, but she couldn't retract it now. Ethan sighed, setting down the sack of apples. "I haven't been avoiding you, not intentionally anyway." "But something is wrong," Nora persisted. "We were becoming friends, I thought, and now you can barely look at me during meals." "It's not." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. "It's not that simple, Miss Harrington." "Nora," she corrected softly. "You called me Nora before." "That was before you came to work for my family," he explained, his expression troubled. "Now you're in a position that depends on our good opinion, and I wouldn't want to complicate that." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're concerned about the propriety of friendship between us given my position in your household." Ethan's wry smile confirmed her guess. "My mother hired you because you're capable and intelligent, not to be pursued by her son. It puts you in an awkward position." "I see." Nora set down her ledger, gathering her courage. "And if I told you that I don't find it awkward at all, that in fact I've missed our conversations quite terribly?" The look that flashed across Ethan's face, hope mingled with surprise, made her heart race. "Have you?" he asked quietly. "Very much so," Nora admitted. "Though I was beginning to think I had imagined the connection between us." "You didn't imagine it." Ethan took a step closer, close enough that Nora could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. "From the moment I pulled you from that quicksand, I haven't been able to think straight around you." but I don't want you to feel obligated or pressured because of your position here." "Ethan Alden," Nora said firmly, surprising herself with her boldness. "I am not a woman easily pressured or obligated. If I enjoy your company, it's because of who you are, not what your family pays me to do." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, transforming his features. "In that case, Miss Harrington, would you do me the honor of accompanying me on a proper ride tomorrow afternoon? Not as my family's employee, but as a lady I'm trying very hard not to fall in love with too quickly." Nora's breath caught at his words. "I would like that very much, though I make no promises about the too quickly part." The change in their relationship was subtle but significant. While they maintained appropriate behavior in front of the family and ranch hands, Ethan and Nora began spending their free time together. They rode across the ranch's vast acreage, Ethan showing Nora his favorite spots: the hidden waterfall that flowed only after spring rains, the ancient petroglyphs carved into canyon walls by long-departed peoples, the perfect hilltop for watching stars appear in the vast New Mexico sky. On these excursions, they talked endlessly. Nora shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's passionate lectures on literature and philosophy, her mother's brief but loving presence in her life. Ethan spoke of growing up on the frontier, the responsibility he felt to his family's legacy, his dreams of combining modern methods with traditional ranching to make the double even more successful. Eleanor and James watched the developing relationship with benevolent interest. One evening in late November, as Nora helped Eleanor mend riding clothes by the fire, the older woman broached the subject directly. "My son is quite taken with you," she observed, her needle flashing in the firelight. "I haven't seen him this happy since before his brother died." Nora's hand stilled in her lap. "I care for him very deeply, Mrs. Alden. I hope you don't find it inappropriate, given my position here." Eleanor laughed softly. "My dear girl, do you think I didn't notice the way you two looked at each other from the very beginning? James and I have been expecting this development for months." "You have?" Nora asked, startled. "Of course. Why do you think we offered you the position? Not just because you're qualified, though you certainly are. We saw how good you were for Ethan, how you challenged him and brought out a side of him we feared had been buried with his brother." Eleanor patted Nora's hand affectionately. "The position was genuine, but our hopes went beyond mere household management." "I don't know what to say," Nora admitted, touched by the revelation. "Say nothing," Eleanor advised. "Just know that whatever develops between you and my son has our blessing. Though I should warn you, he can be stubborn as a mule when he sets his mind to something." "I've noticed," Nora replied with a smile. "It seems to be an Alden family trait." As winter settled over the New Mexico territory, bringing crisp, cold days and occasional snow to the higher elevations, the relationship between Nora and Ethan deepened. Their rides became more infrequent due to weather, but they found other ways to spend time together. Reading aloud by the fire in the evenings, teaching each other card games, and engaging in spirited debates about everything from politics to literature. December brought preparations for Christmas, with Eleanor orchestrating an elaborate celebration that would include not only family, but the ranch hands and several neighboring families as well. Nora threw herself into the festivities, helping decorate the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baking traditional cookies from her mother's recipes, and assisting Rebecca in planning a small musical program. 3 days before Christmas, a fierce winter storm descended on the territory, bringing howling winds and several inches of snow. The ranch hands hurried to secure livestock in sheltered areas, while the family gathered in the main house, grateful for the sturdy walls and ample firewood. "I need to check the line cabins," Ethan announced during breakfast on the storm's second day. "Make sure the men there have enough supplies to wait out the storm." "It's too dangerous," James objected, looking concerned. "The wind's still high and visibility is poor." "All the more reason to check on them," Ethan insisted. "Jenkins and Morales are at the north cabin, if their roof is leaking again or they're running short on firewood." After further discussion, James reluctantly agreed that the welfare of their men justified the risk, but insisted on sending two hands with Ethan rather than letting him go alone. Nora felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach as she helped Ethan prepare, packing extra food and medical supplies. "Please be careful," she said quietly as she handed him the parcel. "The storm still seems fierce." "I'll be back before dark," Ethan promised, his gloved hand lingering on hers. "Don't worry." But as the short winter day progressed, and the afternoon light began to fade with no sign of Ethan and his companions, Nora found herself unable to concentrate on her tasks. She paced from window to window, straining to see through the swirling snow, her concern growing with each passing hour. "They must have decided to stay at the line cabin," James suggested as evening fell, though his own worried expression belied his reassuring words. "Ethan knows better than to travel after dark in these conditions." By midnight, with the storm finally beginning to abate and still no word from Ethan, James organized a search party. Despite Nora's pleas to be included, he insisted she remain at the house with Alina and Rebecca. "The men know this land," he told her gently. "We'll find them faster without having to worry about your safety as well." The hours of waiting were the longest of Nora's life. She moved between helping Alina prepare hot food and coffee for the searchers when they returned, comforting a tearful Rebecca, and staring out into the darkness, praying for Ethan's safe return. Dawn was breaking when they heard the sound of horses in the yard. Nora rushed to the door alongside Alina, her heart in her throat as she watched the search party dismount. James was supporting Ethan, who was limping badly but mercifully alive. "Found them holed up in a canyon," James explained as they helped Ethan into the house. "Horse threw him when they were nearly home, spooked by a falling branch. Might have a broken ankle, but otherwise he's just cold and hungry." "And stubborn," added one of the ranch hands with a relieved grin. "Insisted on riding back despite the pain." Ethan's eyes found Nora's across the room, and the intensity of emotion in his gaze stole her breath. "I promised I'd be back," he said simply. While Alina attended to Ethan's injured ankle, declaring it likely a severe sprain rather than a break, Nora prepared hot broth and coffee for the returning men. Her hands trembled slightly, the fear she had suppressed during the long night finally giving way to relief. Later, with Ethan settled on the sofa in the parlor, his ankle properly bandaged and elevated, Nora brought him a fresh cup of coffee and sat beside him. "You scared me half to death," she admitted, her voice low to avoid disturbing Alina, who had finally gone to rest after the exhausting night. "I'm sorry," Ethan replied, reaching for her hand. "The storm came on stronger than we expected. We had to take shelter in Blackwater Canyon when visibility dropped to nothing." "I kept thinking about how we met," Nora said, lacing her fingers with his. "How random it was that you happened to be riding by the river that day, if you hadn't been there." "But I was," Ethan reminded her. "Just as you were here waiting for me last night. Maybe it's not so random after all." "What do you mean?" Nora asked, searching his face. "I mean that some things are meant to be, Nora Harrington." Ethan's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. "I've known it since the day I pulled you from that quicksand. You're the one I've been waiting for without even knowing I was waiting." Nora's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Ethan, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "And this isn't how I planned to say it, unshaven, smelling like wet horse with my foot throbbing something fierce. But I love you, Nora. I think I've loved you from the moment you made that sarcastic comment about not planning to dance while waist deep in quicksand." A laugh bubbled up through Nora's tears. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "Though I'm not sure what that says about me, falling in love with a man because he lassoed me out of a mud pit." Ethan's answering laugh turned into a groan as the movement jarred his injured ankle. "Worth the pain," he declared, tugging her closer until their foreheads touched. "Would you consider making a more permanent arrangement of our current situation? Are you proposing, Ethan Alden?" Nora asked, her heart soaring despite her attempt at a measured tone. "Inelegantly, but yes." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "I had a whole speech prepared for Christmas Eve and a ring hidden in my desk drawer. But I nearly died out there last night, and it made me realize that some things shouldn't wait." "Then my answer is yes," Nora said without hesitation. "Though I expect that ring and speech when you're feeling better." Ethan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a perfect culmination of the journey that had begun on that hot August day by the river. Christmas at the Double that year was a celebration beyond anyone's expectations. News of Ethan and Nora's engagement spread quickly, adding an extra layer of joy to the holiday festivities. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow into something magical, much like the transformation Nora felt in her own life. "Did you ever imagine," Rebecca asked her on Christmas Eve as they put finishing touches on the decorations, "when you arrived in Aztec last summer, that you'd be preparing to become mistress of the Double by the following Christmas?" "Never," Nora admitted with a smile. "I thought my cousin had left me stranded in a dusty frontier town with no prospects and no future. And instead, you found a family and the love of your life." Rebecca sighed romantically. "It's like something from a novel." "A rather unusual novel," Nora laughed. "I don't recall many heroines being rescued from quicksand by their future husbands." The wedding was set for April, when the harsh winter would have given way to spring, and travel would be easier for the few relatives and friends Nora had invited from back east. In the meantime, she and Ethan spent the winter months planning their future together. "We'll build a new wing onto the main house," Ethan suggested as they reviewed architectural drawings one evening in February. "Give us our own space while still keeping us close to the family." "And a proper library," Nora added, sketching her idea on a spare piece of paper, "with shelves to the ceiling and a window seat for reading." James and Alina watched their planning with approving smiles, occasionally offering suggestions but mostly allowing the young couple to shape their own vision for the future. "You've brought new life to this ranch," James told Nora one afternoon, as they reviewed the household accounts together. "Not just in how you've organized things, but in the hope you've given Ethan and all of us." April arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the New Mexico landscape, as if nature itself were celebrating along with the Alden family. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of sage and new growth. Nora stood in her room, wearing a gown of ivory silk that Alina and Rebecca had helped her select from a catalog, then altered to fit perfectly. Her hair was arranged with sprigs of wildflowers, and around her neck hung a delicate gold locket, a gift from Ethan that morning, containing a tiny coil of rope inside. "To remember how we began," his note had read, making her laugh through happy tears. A knock at the door revealed Martha Wilson, the boarding house keeper who had been Nora's first friend in Aztec. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, clasping Nora's hands. I came to tell you that your guests from the east have arrived. They're being seated now." "Thank you for everything, Martha," Nora said sincerely. "If you hadn't taken me in that first day—" "Providence," Martha said firmly, echoing Alina's assessment from months before. "You were meant to be here, just as surely as the sun rises in the east." The ceremony took place in the garden Alina had lovingly tended for decades, now bursting with early spring blooms. Nora walked on James's arm toward where Ethan waited beneath an arch of twisted branches and flowers, his face alight with joy as he watched her approach. The minister from Aztec's small church led them through their vows, his words nearly drowned out by the pounding of Nora's heart as Ethan slipped a gold band onto her finger. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the assembled guests, a mix of Eastern refinement and Western practicality, erupted in cheers that startled birds from nearby trees. "Mrs. Alden," Ethan whispered as he led her back down the makeshift aisle. "How does it sound?" "Like the most natural thing in the world," Nora replied, squeezing his hand. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with feasting, dancing, and storytelling beneath stars that seemed to shine especially bright for the occasion. As midnight approached, Ethan and Nora slipped away from the revelry to the newly completed wing of the house that would be their home. "Happy?" Ethan asked as they stood in the doorway of their bedroom, the space illuminated by soft lamplight. "Beyond words," Nora assured him, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Though I still can't quite believe how it all began." "With quicksand and a lasso," Ethan chuckled, drawing her close. "Not the most conventional beginning, but I wouldn't change a moment of it." "Nor would I," Nora agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "It turns out getting stuck was the best thing that ever happened to me." Life at the double settled into a new rhythm as spring gave way to summer. Nora transitioned from household manager to full partner in the ranch's operations, her education and organizational skills proving invaluable as Ethan implemented new breeding programs and expanded their markets. Together, they created a blend of Eastern refinement and Western practicality that made the double a renowned throughout the territory. Their home became a gathering place for intellectuals, artists, and entrepreneurs passing through New Mexico, as well as a warm haven for the ranch hands and local families who had been part of the Alden circle for generations. On their first anniversary, Ethan surprised Nora with a trip to the spot where they had met. The river was running high with spring melt, the cottonwoods lush with new leaves, the spot where she had been trapped now overgrown with grass and wildflowers. "Hard to believe it happened here," Nora remarked as they spread a picnic blanket on safe, solid ground well away from the riverbank. "It seems like a dream now." "A good dream," Ethan agreed, unpacking the basket Alina had prepared for them. "One that keeps getting better." As they ate, Nora gathered her courage to share the news she had been saving for this special day. "I have something to tell you," she began, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Something that will change our lives again." Ethan's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Nora, are you?" "Yes," she confirmed, her face glowing with happiness. "Dr. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in November." The joy that transformed Ethan's face was everything Nora had hoped for. He gathered her in his arms, laughing and crying all at once, his hands gentle as they cradled her face for a tender kiss. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "Our baby. A new Alden for the AA. Your mother is already planning the nursery," Nora confessed. "I couldn't keep it from her when she guessed yesterday morning." "Of course she guessed," Ethan laughed. "Nothing escapes that woman's notice." His expression sobered slightly, becoming more thoughtful. "I hope our child has your courage and intelligence." "And your kindness and integrity," Nora added, "and neither of our tendencies toward getting into trouble. With our combined history, not likely," Ethan teased, pulling her close against his side as they gazed out over the landscape that had brought them together. In November, as the first snow dusted the peaks of the distant mountains, James William Alden came into the world after a long but uncomplicated labor. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression, and from his first cry it was clear he possessed the strength of both his parents. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, cradling his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Absolutely perfect." "He is," Nora agreed, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband and son together. "Our miracle." The years that followed brought more children. Rebecca Aliner, 2 years later, followed by Daniel Thomas and finally little Sarah Grace, who arrived unexpectedly when Nora was 40, a joyful surprise that completed their family. The double prospered under Ethan and Nora's guidance, weathering the challenges of changing markets, occasional drought, and the territory's transition to statehood in 1912. They added modern conveniences as they became available: telephone lines, electricity, eventually even automobiles, while maintaining the traditions and values that had made the ranch successful for generations. Their children grew up with books and horses, learning both intellectual pursuits and practical skills. James eventually took over management of the ranch, while Rebecca became a doctor, Daniel a lawyer, and Sarah a teacher who never wandered far from home. Through it all, Ethan and Nora's love remained the cornerstone of their existence. Even in their 60s, they could be found riding together across the ranch in the early mornings or reading to each other by the fire in the evenings, their affection undimmed by the passage of time. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the double for a celebration that lasted 3 days. During a quiet moment, Ethan took Nora's hand and led her away from the festivities, down to the river that had changed their lives. "Remember that day?" he asked as they stood on the bank, now reinforced with stones to prevent erosion and the formation of dangerous quicksand. "How could I forget?" Nora replied, leaning against his shoulder. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with the evidence of decades of laughter and occasional tears, but her eyes were as bright and intelligent as ever. "You saved my life that day." "And you saved mine," Ethan replied softly, wrapping his arm around her waist. "In every way that matters." "I was just existing before you came along, Nora. You gave me purpose, joy, a family beyond my wildest dreams." "We gave those things to each other," Nora corrected gently, "and I wouldn't change a moment of it." As they turned to walk back toward the house where their family waited, Ethan paused to look back at the river one last time. "Thank you," he murmured, too quietly for Nora to hear. He wasn't sure if he was thanking the river or fate or God or some combination of all three. But he knew with absolute certainty that the moment he had thrown his lasso around a stubborn, sharp-tongued Boston girl, trapped in quicksand, had been the most important moment of his life. And as they walked hand in hand back to the home they had built together, surrounded by the legacy of their love, Ethan knew that some rescues went both ways. He had pulled Nora from the quicksand that day long ago, but she had saved him from a life half-lived, anchoring him with a love as vast and enduring as the New Mexico sky.